I took the job because it was easy money, and because I liked dogs. That's how I explained it to my sister on the phone while I was walking to the house. Backpack on, a little out of breath. The woman who hired me, her name was Mara, found me through the app. She said her regular sitter moved away. The pay was more than generous for 3 nights, which made me think the house would be one of those big places with heated floors and a pantry the size of my apartment. I pictured a friendly golden retriever with a stupid grin and a tail that could sweep crumbs off a coffee table. The house wasn't like that. It sat at the end of a sloped street where the streetlights ended too soon. It was narrow and tall, a stacked house leaning a little. There were curtains across the windows like pressed palms. I rang the bell and listened to my breathing until the door opened. "You're early," she said. "Yeah. Sorry." Bus was faster than I thought. She was maybe late 30s, hair pulled back tight, a sweater that looked soft but thin. She opened the door wider. "Come in." The smell hit me right away. Not bad exactly, just layered, like old wood, bleach, and something sweet trying to cover something else. The foyer was cramped, shoe rack to the right, a thin table with a bowl of keys on the left. There were 3 doors visible, one at the back of the hall, one to the living room, and one that looked like a closet, but had a latch and a padlock. The padlock was open, hanging like an earring. "That's the basement," she said, catching me looking. "The latch sticks. Don't force it." "Got it." She led me to the kitchen. It was brighter in there. A window looked out on a small yard with patchy grass and a crooked fence. The dog was in front of the sliding door, watching us like we were a show. He was big, taller than I expected. Not a fancy breed. Coat like watered-down coffee. His head was too broad for his body, eyes a pale yellow I didn't know dogs could have. He thumped his tail once when he saw me, and then went still again. "This is Luther," she said. "He's a sweetheart. He just looks like that." "Hi, Luther." I kept my voice soft and steady the way sitters online always do in their videos. My hand went out, palm sideways. He sniffed, then pressed his forehead against my fingers. His skull felt heavy, like a brick under fur. I scratched behind his ears. He pressed harder. "He likes pressure," she said. "When he gets stressed, he'll lean on things. Or on you. Don't let him pin you. Just step out of it." "Okay." She had printed instructions on the counter. They were neat and precise, bullet points. The schedule was basic. Breakfast at 7, quick walk after, dinner at 6, longer walk around 9. Don't feed him table food. Don't leave doors open. Keep the fence gate bolted. A few notes stood out. Don't let him near the compost. He's a counter surfer, so keep knives away from the edge. And then, on a line by itself, underlined twice. If he fixates on the basement door, redirect him with a toy. I looked up from the paper and she was watching me. "Fixates," I said. "It's just a habit. He hears the washer. He thinks there's someone down there. Sometimes he'll sit and stare." She tried to smile. "He's dramatic." I nodded. She moved around the kitchen, opening cabinets, showing me where things go. Food in the plastic bin by the fridge, his leash on a hook, a box of treats. She took one out and handed it to me. "Go on. Say his name first." "Luther." He looked at me like he'd always known me. I held out the treat and he took it with careful lips, then crunched, still staring at me. "You'll be fine," she said. She checked her phone. "I need to leave soon if I'm going to make the train. Do you have any questions?" I don't know why I looked at the basement door again. It was partly open now, a slice of shadow. The padlock was still hanging off the latch. "You said the washer's down there?" I asked. "And the dryer. If you need to do laundry, feel free. But don't force the latch. It's old." "Okay." She grabbed a weekend bag from beside the table, lifted the strap onto her shoulder. The bag looked heavier than I expected. She kept one hand on it like it might slide off. 3 nights, she said again, like a confirmation to herself. "I'll be back Monday afternoon. You can just let yourself out." "Have a good trip," I said. She scratched Luther's head, and he leaned on her hard enough that she had to step back. "Be good," she told him. Then she was gone. Quick steps, door closing, locks sneaking into place. I stood in the kitchen with the dog and the laminated instructions. The house got quiet, like it was waiting to see what I'd do. I fed him at 6 like the page said. He ate like somebody might steal it, fast, snout clicking the bowl. After that, we went for a walk around the block. He pulled it first, then fell into step. He didn't bark at anyone. He gave the storm drains a wide berth like he knew something about them. When we came back, he went straight to the sliding door and stared into the yard. I let him out. He trotted to the far corner, sniffed the dirt, peed, then slunk along the fence, stopping to smell things I couldn't see. He didn't run or play. He was all nose and angles, a quiet investigator. That night I slept on the couch in the front room because I couldn't deal with sleeping in someone else's bed. The couch was fine. Luther slept on the rug, but not close. He chose a spot where he could see the hallway. Twice during the night I woke up because he was standing and listening. It's a soundless movement, but it changes the air somehow. Each time I sat up and rubbed my face and asked, "What is it?" Like he might answer. He flicked his ears and then lay back down. I fell asleep again. I had strange dreams that evaporated when I tried to look at them. In the morning I made coffee and toast and texted my sister a photo of Luther with the caption, "My client." She sent back a heart and then a second text. "His eyes are creepy." I told her shut up. I looked at Luther and said, "You're handsome." He burped, a low, wet sound, and stared at the basement door. It was closed now, the latch hanging straight down, the padlock fastened around it but not locked. I hadn't done that. I went over and slid the padlock off the latch, opened the door to check. The steps were steep. The light at the bottom was yellow. I pulled the chain. It took a couple of seconds to catch. The light showed concrete, a washer and dryer, a shelf of paint cans, a folded ping-pong table shoved against a wall. Everything looked normal and empty. A trickle of cool air came up the stairs. Luther put his front paws on the threshold and stared. His head went rigid in my hand. "Not now," I said. I dropped the chain and closed the door. He looked at me for a long time, and then away, like I had disappointed him. The day slid by. I did some work on my laptop. Luther paced, slept, paced. Around 2, he started whining at the sliding door. I let him out and he made a slow circle of the yard, nose down. He went to the compost bin, sniffed, then pawed at the ground next to it. There was a patch of dirt there that didn't match the rest of the lawn. It was darker, lumped. I could see where a shovel had cut the sod and put it back. I told myself Mara had done some gardening. He pawed at it again and then looked at me like, "Can I?" "Leave it," I said. He listened, which I didn't expect. He walked away and went to the fence and stared through a gap at the neighbor's yard. He didn't wag or growl. He just stood like that until I called him in. That night there was rain. The yard got slick and shiny. The compost bin tipped in the wind and rolled until it hit the fence with a dull sound. Luther didn't sleep much. He kept going to the sliding door and back, restless. I played fetch down the hallway, but he didn't want to chase. He wanted to lean against me and tremble and stare at the basement. At one point he went to the door and set his forehead against it like he was listening with his skull. I filled a chew toy with peanut butter, and he took it without enthusiasm, then set it down untouched. At midnight, or whatever it was, since I wasn't looking at clocks, I heard a sound that wasn't the rain. It was a scrape from the back of the house, soft but clear. I was on the couch under a blanket. Luther lifted his head. He looked at me, then at the sliding door. The hair along his spine went up like a wave. "Probably a branch," I said, because saying anything felt safer than being quiet. There was another scrape, and a hollow thump, like something knocking politely. I stood up, hard in my throat. Luther didn't bark. He walked toward the kitchen slow and strange, like he was stalking invisible prey. I followed him and flipped on the light. The kitchen looked the same, except for the dark rectangle of the sliding door. I couldn't see the yard. The glass had fogged a little from my own breath or the humidity. That must have been it, I thought. The wind, the compost bin, a loose board in the fence. I put my hand on the cold glass and wiped a clear circle. My breath made little clouds as I tried to focus on the yard. There was nothing there. We stood like that for a minute. Me with my forehead against the door. Luther pressed against my legs so hard I had to brace. The rain slackened. The yard took shape again, grayscale in the porch light. The compost bin was tipped on its side near the fence. The patch of turned soil by the bin looked darker than the rest, like fresh coffee grounds. When I finally turned away, Luther had already moved. He was at the basement door. He scratched at it once with the blunt side of his paw. Not a frantic scratch. Just the sound a person makes when they want to be polite and still be let in. "Dude," I said. "Enough." I grabbed a toy and tossed it down the hallway. He didn't go. He sat, head high, ears forward, eyes pale and fixed. Then he started to make a sound I hadn't heard from him yet, a low whine that climbed and thinned. Not a cry, not a howl, something between. I put my hand on his collar and felt the tremor in his neck he couldn't control. It made my fingers buzz. I opened the basement door. It felt like a mistake even as I did it, but the feeling was remote, like a thought I could have later when I was calmer. The light clicked on after a second. Same yellow circle. Luther waited for me to go first. I don't know why I did. Halfway down, I realized I was holding my breath because I ran out of it and had to suck in air that smelled like damp cardboard and detergent. On the third step from the bottom, there was a smear of something on the wall. I tried to tell myself it was rust from the nail head there. It wasn't. It was brown and thin, almost dried. I put my hand on my own chest to stop myself from touching it. The basement looked exactly the same as it had that morning, which somehow made it worse. Luther stayed on the steps. His nails clicked, stopped. He didn't come down. He stared toward the far corner where the ping-pong table leaned. For the first time since I'd met him, he made a sound you could call a growl. It came out like the echo of a truck far away. I told him it was okay, which made him grow louder. I stood there long enough for the light to hum into the background, for my eyes to accept that there was nothing to see. Then I went back up. When I reached the door, I saw that the padlock had fallen, swung, and caught itself on the latch again like a pendulum that forgot to swing back. I closed the door and felt with my fingertips the way the wood had been worn smooth, where someone had held it many times. The sound from outside came again, the scrape and the thump. Luther bolted for the kitchen. I followed on legs that didn't feel steadied, as if the joints had weakened by one notch. At the sliding door, I wiped the glass clear again. The yard had changed in a way that I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't been looking for changes. The compost bin was farther from the fence, like something had dragged it and abandoned it mid-yard. The patch of dirt next to where it had been was now a shallow dip. The rain had made rivulets, and the dip had collected water. The surface of that little pool was black and flat. In the porch light, I could see faint rings spreading on it, like something was moving just under the surface. "Don't," I said out loud to myself. "You're being stupid." The next morning, I put extra grounds in the coffee maker and left the mug on the counter until my hands stopped shaking. The rain had passed. The whole world looked like it had been rinsed and then not dried. Luther wanted out first thing. I clipped his leash to make sure he wouldn't jump the fence. He didn't bother with the yard. He went straight to the patch. The soil had slumped where the water had collected. He sniffed and then began to dig, fast, focused. The leash pulled my wrist. I told him to leave it. He ignored me. I told him again, quick and sharp. He stopped, looked back at me, mouth closed, and then pawed once more, almost like he couldn't help it. Dirt flicked up on my shoes. I pulled. He leaned. And then he gave up and walked around the yard once like he was trying to waste the digging energy on something else. He peed on the compost bin. He stared through the fence slats at the neighbor's yard. He licked his chops. That was new too. I changed plans. We went for a longer walk in the early afternoon to tire him out. Around the blocks I didn't know. Past houses with the same tired shrubs. Past a playground with a slide that had a crack duct-taped closed. Luther walked with his head low, ears moving like little radar dishes. Once he sniffed a street gutter for so long, I had to physically pull him away. A man in a pickup slowed at a stop sign and watched us. The man had that look people get when they think they recognize a dog from somewhere. Then he drove off. When we got home, the house felt different. I know the request was to avoid cliches, so I'll be clear. It wasn't that the house felt alive or any of that. It just felt like I had left a TV on in another room, and someone had turned the volume down to a whisper while I was gone. Luther walked straight to the basement door and rested his chin on the wood. He didn't scratch or whine. He just stood there with his jaw set like he'd made a decision. "Hey," I said, "food first." He ate dinner. He didn't finish, which was a first. He left a crescent of dry kibble around the bowl like a spill, and then went to the sliding door and stood there. The yard looked ordinary again, if you ignored the disturbed patch by the compost. I didn't let him out because something had shifted in me too. It wasn't just the dog. It was the idea that the yard was no longer neutral, that it had started to act on its own, that if I let him out now, the yard would take him somewhere I couldn't follow. I slid the lock on the door. He watched my hand do it. At some point that evening, I called Mara, straight to voicemail. Her recorded voice was brisk. "Leave it here. I'll get back to you when I can." I didn't know her last name. On the app, she had only used Mara and a profile picture where she was wearing sunglasses. I texted her, "Everything okay? House making noises. Luther fixating on basement. He's eating okay. When are you back on Monday?" The app showed the messages delivered. No reply. I slept worse that night. Luther wandered. He would start to doze and then lift his head and listen, then stand and move to a different part of the room and lie down again like he had to balance something I couldn't see. Twice he went to the bathroom and stared at the tub. I learned that I could tell when he was staring at something versus just looking. Staring is the absence of blinking. Staring means his breath changes. Staring means the object has a magnet in it. Around what felt like deep night, a smell reached me. Not a strong smell, not thick, but specific. For a second I thought it was coming from my own mouth, the dry, sour taste of morning breath. But then I realized it was wet, not dry. It came from the kitchen. Luther had already moved. I followed him because it was worse to be alone in a room and not know what he was doing. In the kitchen, the sliding door was still locked. The smell was stronger here. It was not the compost. I know that smell. This was something else. This was like a blocked drain. It was like food that used to be meat and is now only the idea of meat. I cupped my hand around my eyes and looked out through the glass. At first I couldn't see anything wrong. Then I saw Luther's reflection look away from mine, gaze dropping to the floor, and I followed it, down to the track of the sliding door, where the sill meets the frame. There was a smear along the metal. Not a lot. Just enough to notice if you were looking. Luther sniffed and licked once. I pulled him back. I turned on the porch light. The yard lit up like a dead stage. The patch by the compost was wider now, a shallow scoop cut into the ground. The compost bin had rolled again, farther. The back gate was closed, but the bolt on it was missing. The smell came and went like waves at a beach. I pressed my forehead to the glass and realigned what I thought with what I saw. When I lifted my head, there was a mark on the glass where my skin had touched. I used the hem of my shirt to wipe it away and noticed a fine scratch on the pane next to it. It was thin and curving and only visible at angle. If I hadn't been cleaning, I would have missed it. I looked at the rest of the glass and saw more of them. Not random, parallel in sets. Claw marks if I wanted to be dramatic. But these were too small for a dog. A raccoon, maybe, or a cat desperate to get in, or out. I unlocked the door and stepped onto the porch because I needed proof that I could. The boards were damp under my socks. I stood with the door still open, one foot inside and one out, like that would keep me safe from whatever line I had crossed. Luther didn't try to push past me. He stood just inside, body rigid. He looked at me and then did something he hadn't done since I arrived. He raised his lips, not all the way, just a little, showing the square tops of his teeth. The sound he made wasn't loud. It was the kind of sound that rearranges your spine and makes you suddenly aware of where your ribs are. "It's okay," I said, but softly to myself. I took 2 steps into the yard. The night air had that cold that doesn't go away after you name it. The fence seemed too close and too far at the same time. I went to the compost patch because I couldn't not. The earth there had sunk a little more. I crouched and put a hand out as if I was going to touch it, then changed my mind and gave it a tap with my knuckle. The sound was hollow in some places and dull in others. I wish I had a better way to say that. That's just how it sounded. Behind me, a soft knock against wood. I turned. The sliding door had moved a centimeter, the way doors do when they settle. The porch light made a halo of insects around itself. The smell rose and fell. I stood up and felt every muscle in my thighs complain. I went back inside and locked the door. I don't know when I fell asleep, but at some point, I must have. An empty kind of sleep, like a screen held in front of a window. I woke up because Luther was gone. For a second, I thought he'd gone to the bathroom again, but then I felt the air moving from the back of the house. A string of night air pulled through a straw. The sliding door was open. Not much, just a hand's width. The lock was still in the down position, which meant nothing because it must not have caught. The smell was strong now. It filled the kitchen in a way that didn't let you think of anything else. "Luther," I said. Not loud, because loud would make whatever this was decide what to be. He didn't come. I stepped outside, barefoot, because I had no shoes where I was, and I didn't want to go back through the front room to get them. The boards were colder now. The air had shifted, and with it, the yard. At the edge of the porch, a line of damp paw prints led down the steps and across the brittle grass, not straight, but arrowing gently left. I followed them with my eyes and saw him toward the fence, near the patch. He was hunched, front legs braced, head lowered, working at something. The posture was unmistakable. Animals only take that shape when they're eating. I started walking without needing to choose. The closer I got, the worse the smell was. It wasn't even that it was strong. It was thick. It sat on my tongue. I could feel where it settled in my sinuses. When I was halfway across the yard, Luther lifted his head and looked at me. He had something pale in his mouth. He didn't run or look guilty. He just looked, and then went back to it, jaw moving. There was a sound that I'm not going to try to describe in detail. Not because I'm being dramatic, but because the detail doesn't help. The sound was the sound of something soft being chewed. That's enough. "Drop it," I said, and my voice came out higher than usual. He didn't. He kept eating, slow and methodical, like he was making something right in himself that had been wrong for a long time. I reached him and put my hand on his collar. He gave me a look from the side, his eyes showing white in a way I hadn't seen before. It was a warning that wasn't a warning. It was a notice. This is what I'm doing. He kept working his jaw. I tugged on his collar, and he planted his feet harder. The ground there wasn't stable. It gave under us. I said his name again. He paused. He let something fall from his mouth. It landed with a soft sound. Not heavy, not light. It struck the damp ground and rolled to the side. I saw fingers. I saw the curve of a wrist, not attached to anything I could see right away. That's enough description for you to understand what it was. There was dirt stuck to the skin like flour. There were no dramatic details to catalog. No rings, no nail polish. Just a hand, as ordinary as a handshake, and out of place in the worst way. I felt my body do something I can only call a reset, like I had to unplug and plug myself back in. I walked backward without deciding to. My heel hit the compost bin, and it knocked against the fence with a hollow sound. Luther lowered his head again and resumed eating. He didn't hurry. He didn't make a mess. He was deliberate, almost neat. The hole was wider than I had thought. Not deep, no more than a foot or so, but wide enough that the sides had slumped. The rest of whatever was there was still mostly covered. The hand had rolled out like it had waited for exactly the right angle. I tried to say something to no one, and only a dry, small sound came. I went inside. I closed the sliding door. I locked it correctly this time, which felt like tying a string around a boulder. I walked to the sink and turned on the tap, and held my hands under the water because I needed to feel them be useful. They weren't dirty. I washed them anyway, up to the wrists, scrubbing, then halfway up my forearms. I looked at my reflection in the black window over the sink and didn't recognize the set of my mouth. When I turned back to the door, Luther was there. He stood outside, looking in through the glass. He wasn't asking to come in. He had something in his mouth again. He stood still and held it, like a dog with a prize he isn't sure he can bring inside. It took a full 2 seconds for me to understand what I was looking at. Seeing it from that distance made it worse, because my mind wanted to supply ordinary explanations. A stick, a bone from the butcher shop, a toy that had gotten muddy. Then the ordinary options fell away one by one. It wasn't even that it was gruesome. It wasn't. It was just wrong. He lifted it slightly, as if to show me, and then let it fall at his feet. He lowered his head and resumed. Something I had been ignoring stepped into the room then. It was simple, and didn't require any real thought. Call the police. I went for my phone. It wasn't on the counter where I thought I'd left it. I checked the front room, the couch, inside the blanket. Nothing. I checked the coffee table, the floor, under the throw pillows. Nothing. The back of my neck prickled the way skin does when a hair gets pulled. I had my laptop. I could call from that. I opened it with hands that had water still drying on them. The keyboard felt wrong under my fingers. The password took me 2 tries. The screen came up. I clicked the call icon. The house router spun and spun. No connection. I checked the cable from the router to the wall. It was in. The indicator lights were dark. I went to the outlet and saw that the power strip had been switched off. I put my thumb on the red switch and stood there without flipping it, because something as small as that suddenly felt like a decision that would change the next hour in a way I couldn't undo. I flipped it anyway. The lights on the router flickered, then steadied. I went back to the laptop. The network name was there, but when I clicked it, it told me the password was wrong. I typed it again. Wrong. I turned my head and looked out at Luther because I needed something else to be in my eyes. He had moved to the side of the porch now, away from the sliding door, as if telling me that my part in this was only to watch. He was breathing hard but quiet. His shoulders moved with each breath, and each breath looked like a plan. I remembered my sister. I remembered that I had texted her that morning. I remembered that she would still be up. I typed a message. Call me now, emergency. I hit send. The little bubble stayed blue with a dot under it. Not delivered. I tried again. No luck. I picked up the house phone on the wall because the house had one, which felt like an anchor. There was no dial tone. I pressed the hook button a couple times like it was 1998. Nothing. The basement, I thought, and didn't want to think it. The breaker must be down there. The cable must run through there. The house's spine must be down there. Luther had stopped eating and was now standing in the yard again, head up, sniffing the air like it had changed. It had. The smell had become bigger than itself. It sounded like something a person with a sinus infection might say. But that's what it felt like. The smell had shape now. I opened the basement door. The chain light came on slower this time. The smear on the wall had darkened to a shade I didn't want to name. I walked down the steps because I had to, because no one else was here to do it. I told myself I was a sitter, and the house was my job. I told myself these were just utilities and switches and labels. The bottom step felt gritty. I felt it through my socks. I turned to the left, toward the breaker panel. The labels were handwritten in pencil. Kitchen, front, porch, washer, dryer, outside. I ran my fingers over them and felt that they weren't the right kind of smooth. It's a stupid detail to notice, but that's what happens when your mind is trying to think about anything else. Something moved in the corner. A shadow shifting within a shadow. I turned quickly enough to make my vision hold still for a second after I stopped. Not a person. A shape low to the ground, then no shape at all. I told myself it was a trick of light. I told myself it was the chain sway. I told myself a lot of things, and none of them mattered because my feet stepped back up the first 3 stairs on their own, and my hands went cold in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Upstairs, Luther scratched at the sliding door, just once, like a reminder. I went to him and opened it. He came in without looking at me. He walked past me into the kitchen and drank from his bowl for a long time, then stood there with water dripping from his jowls, breathing like a person who had run up a hill. He looked satisfied, if you can say that about a dog. He lay down on the tile and put his head on his paws, his eyes closed. He didn't sleep. He watched the room through slits. He watched me so hard it felt like being pinned. I had to do something simple. I got a trash bag from under the sink. I went outside and picked up the thing he had dropped earlier without looking directly at it. I slipped it into the bag. The weight of it was wrong. I tied the bag shut and put it in the outside bin and closed the bin lid and placed a brick on top because that felt like an action. When I came back in, Luther had moved to the hallway. He was lying across it, blocking the path to the front door and the basement both. He didn't growl when I approached. He didn't wag. He just watched my feet. I stepped over him slowly, and he lifted his head enough that his nose touched my ankle. The touch was light, but it made me pause. I reached down and stroked the top of his head. He leaned into it for a second and then away like the comfort wasn't for him. In the front room, I sat on the couch and tried to think in straight lines. I could leave. I could take my backpack and walk out and go to a neighbor and hammer on the door and explain nothing and too much. I could call from there. But I thought of the unlocked back gate. I thought of the patch in the yard and the way the dirt had slumped like breath letting out. I thought of how Luther had carried something into his mouth with care. I thought of Mara's voice saying, "He's dramatic." I thought of the padlock hanging on the basement latch like an ornament. like a dare. My phone buzzed. I jumped. It was my sister. The text had finally gone through. She wrote. I called her. This time it connected. What's wrong? She said. I'm at a sit, I said. There's something in the yard. What do you mean, something? A body, I said. Saying the word took the air out of my chest like someone had opened a valve. I think. I don't want to look again. Silence, and then call the police. I know. The internet's been weird. The house phone is dead. I'm using my cell now, but I swallowed. Okay, I'll call. You want me to stay on? Yeah, stay. I added the police on the other line. I heard my voice explain an address, a situation. The dispatcher was calm and efficient, asked me to stay inside, asked if anyone was hurt, asked if there was a weapon. I said no, and yes, and I don't know to different questions. She said officers were on their way. She told me not to touch anything else. She told me to keep the dog secure. Okay, I said. I can do that. When I hung up, my sister was still there. You okay? She asked. I think so. Do you want me to come? It's far, I said. Just stay up. Text me if... I didn't know how to finish. If I go quiet. If I say something that doesn't sound like me. If. They'll be there soon, she said. You're doing the right thing. I wanted to believe her because that's what you do with the people who love you. You let them make sentences that fit around the day like a good coat. I said okay. We hung up. I waited. Waiting stretched and thinned. The house made small sounds. The fridge compressor, the tick of a vent, the little shift of wood as the air changed. Luther lay in the hallway, head up, listening. His ears moved like doors opening and closing. Twice he huffed. A breath emptied hard. He smelled like the yard now, a dampness that wouldn't dry. I thought of Mara. I thought of her thin sweater and the heavy bag and the way she said, 3 nights. Like saying it twice would put a fence around the time. I thought of the open padlock, how it had been open when I arrived and closed when I didn't close it, and how neither of those facts made sense. I heard a car on the street and sat up. Headlights didn't spill through the curtains. The car passed. The street went quiet again. The quiet grew until it had weight. Then, from the back of the house, the faint sound of the sliding door rattling in its frame, not opening, just flexing, like the air on the other side had changed pressure. Stay, I told Luther, and he lifted his head in a way that looked like a nod. I walked to the kitchen. The door was shut and locked. Beyond the glass, the yard was a rectangle of darker dark. The porch light had burned out or switched off. I reached for the switch and felt the plastic under my finger. The light didn't come on. I waited for the bulb to decide, the way bulbs sometimes do. It stayed dark. I left it. It felt like pressing it again would invite the wrong kind of attention. I went back to the front room and sat. I tried to think of the morning, how I would describe this in the morning when I had to say it out loud to strangers with notepads. I tried to find sentences that didn't sound unhinged. I was still trying when I heard the first siren, faint and distant, and let myself breathe in a way that hurt my chest, like I had been holding it wrong for hours. Luther stood. He walked to the front door and sat, suddenly obedient. He looked up at me. I walked to the door and put my hand on the knob and held it there without turning it, listening for footsteps on gravel, a car engine settling, the radio chatter that sounds like insects through a wall. The siren stopped. The night outside filled the spaces it left. I looked through the peephole. The street was empty. There was no car. There had never been one. Behind me from the kitchen, the sound of glass shifting in a frame again. Then a small, deliberate click, like a latch choosing a side. Luther moved before I did, a streak of weight and muscle, a shape I felt go past. I followed, because that's what you do when something you trust decides. In the kitchen, the sliding door was open just enough for a hand to fit through. Not a big hand, a careful hand. The lock was still down. The smell had come inside and sat down at the table like a guest. Luther stood in front of the door, planted, body a barrier. The night breathed against us. I could hear now, faint, something in the yard moving through the damp patches, the way a person moves through a crowded room without touching anyone. The sound had a pattern. It wasn't random. Luther's ears went forward and stayed like that, sculpted by attention. I reached for the handle to slide the door shut. From the other side, something knocked, once. Not loud, not a plea, more like a greeting, from the wrong mouth. "Don't," I said, and I don't know who I was talking to. I stood with my hand on the handle, and Luther stood beside me like a piece of furniture built for this one use. The night pressed its face to the crack and inhaled. I held my breath because that felt like not giving something away. I thought of the hand in the yard and how ordinary it had been in the dark. I thought of the padlock on the basement door and how it had felt warm the first time I touched it, like it had just been held. At some point, without moving, I made a decision that would be worse to explain later. I stepped backward, away from the door, leaving it open. I got the leash from the hook. I clipped it to Luther's collar. He looked at me, and then at the yard, and then back at me. I wrapped the leash twice around my wrist, around the bones there, feeling the nylon bite. I turned off the kitchen light with the outside world already coming in, black and wet. I said, "Okay," to no one, and to him. We stepped together toward the open door, my heart beating so hard I could feel it in my gums. And that's where I'll stop this part, because everything after this doesn't make sense without the rest. I didn't say anything heroic when we stepped onto the porch. I held the leash tighter and felt Luther lean forward into it. The air had that bitter taste old pennies have. The yard was quiet in the way a room is quiet when someone is holding their breath. The patch by the compost was a darker oval. Something moved near the back gate. A small shift the way fabric shifts if someone brushes it. Luther didn't bark. He drew a bead on the patch and took me there at a steady pull, not a lunge. I let him, up to the point where the soil gave. I planted my feet. We stood at the edge. The ground was soft enough that if you pressed your heel, you left water and silt in a shallow footprint. There was a noise under the dirt, like grain rolling in a jar. Rats would have been a relief. This wasn't that. It was slower. Luther eased forward, neck stretched, inhaling in long pulls. He touched his paw to the edge and the surface slumped another inch. The smell lifted and settled. He looked at me once, a quick flash of eye like, "You see it too." The back gate shivered. I turned toward the sound and saw the bolt was gone, same as before, but the wood had fresh scrape marks along the latch, thin and pale. The gate didn't open. It just inched back and knocked itself forward. Wind could do that, or a person with a careful hand. I pulled on the leash. "Back," I said. My voice was a bad tool in my mouth, but it worked. Luther shifted his weight and came with me, step by step, until his front paws hit firmer ground. I led him to the porch and up. I slid the door shut and set the broom handle in the track, because doing something with my hands made the room fall into order for a second. I turned and put my back against the glass, not because it helped, but because my legs wanted a wall. We waited with the lights off. I texted my sister that the police were on their way. She said, "Good. Stay inside." She added, "Pet him. It's good for you." I put my hand on Luther's ribs. He was hot and damp. His heart ran steady and strong against my palm like a machine that knows its job. He didn't look at me. He had that 1,000-yard focus dogs get when they're tracking something only they can see. Headlights finally came up the street. This time I heard doors, real car doors, and voices, a woman and a man, clipped and normal. I opened the front door. The woman was in front, hand near her belt, the kind of posture that said she'd had 100 false alarms and one she remembered. The man was behind her, broader, older. "Call?" the woman asked. "Yes," I said. "Back here." I realized I sounded like a recording. I tried again. "The yard." They stepped in. The woman took in the hallway, the kitchen light that wasn't on, Luther, the leash, the sliding door. She asked if anyone else was in the house. I said no. She asked if the dog was safe. I said yes. But it felt like a lie you tell about someone you love because you want the listener to like them. We went to the kitchen. I took the broom handle out of the track and opened the door. I said, "He'll pull," and handed the leash to the male officer because if Luther was going to take anyone anywhere, it shouldn't be me. The officer set his feet like he'd done this before. The woman went down the steps first with a flashlight, beam low, steady. The light made the yard look like an unfinished drawing. She stopped at the patch. The beam tilted. She said the officer's name, a short word with authority in it. He went beside her. Luther ended up shoulder to thigh between them, leaning, silent. The woman crouched and touched the soil with the back of her knuckles. She moved the light in a slow arc, then held it on the slumped edge. "Step back, please," she said. She was looking at me, not accusing, just tidying the scene so it would fit in her head. "Is that—" I started. "That's human," she said, "not theatrical, not cruel. We'll secure the area. Dispatch is sending additional units." She looked at the gate, the fence, the alley beyond. "Keep the dog inside." I took the leash. Luther let me lead him up, not because he wanted to, but because he understood order. I shut the door. The woman radioed without moving, sentences that built a grid around the yard. The older officer stayed put and watched the patch like it might decide to get up and walk. Within minutes, more cars. Blue light painted the front room and washed over picture frames like fish scales. Tape and voices and boots and careful steps. A neighbor's porch light came on, and someone stood there in a robe and then went back inside fast. Like if you closed your door correctly. Whatever the night hadn't been contagious. They asked for my statement in the front room. I told them about the smell, the hand, the sliding door, the broken bolt. I told them about the basement door, the smear, the way the router had been off and then wrong. As I talked, the words rearranged the hours into a line. Saying it out loud stripped it of some power. Not all, just enough for breath. A different set of officers went down to the basement. I wasn't allowed to follow. I heard the chain light click, heard someone swear under their breath in a way that made my skin get tight. I looked at Luther. He was sitting, but his body was wired. He was pointed at the hallway. He was waiting. The detective had a thin paperback face and eyes that didn't get lost in the uniforms. He asked for the owner's name. Mara, I said. Just Mara on the app. I scrolled and showed him the profile, the sunglasses picture. He noted the number and asked if I had called her. I said yes. He tried too. Straight to voicemail. He went to the kitchen and stood with the woman officer looking out at the yard. People moved inside the tape with the careful, silent speed of people who do this regularly. One of them came in and said something low about more disturbance around the gate line and bags. And the detective's face did that thing faces do when the map in your head expands and you don't want it to. Sit tight, he told me. I hated the phrase but nodded. He told another officer to stay with me. The guy was young enough to still be trying out his professional voice. He asked what I did for work. I told him freelance tech support. He nodded like that said something about me in this. I didn't ask what. They brought a stretcher through the side. Empty, just a frame and a bag. They brought a portable light and set it on the porch and flooded the yard with white. Luther stared into it like winter. I gave him water. He didn't drink. He took one step forward and then lay down with his chin between his paws. He was thinking. I could feel it. Someone in the basement called for the detective. He went. Minutes passed. The officer with me looked at his radio like he wanted it to tell him an easier story. When the detective came back, there was dust on his shoulders, and he carried an evidence bag with a wallet in it. He held it the way you hold something you don't want to drop, even though it's sealed. "Can I see?" I asked. Not because I had a right, but because sharing the look would spread the weight. He tilted it so I could see through the cloudy plastic. The ID said a name I didn't know. The photo was a man with a smirk that looked like it had been an attempt at smiling. The address was nowhere near here. "Who is that?" I said. "We'll find out," he said. "There are more bags. We're going to start a search of the interior and the outbuildings. We'll need you to stay put." "Outbuildings," I repeated, because a small house didn't have plural outside without help. "There's a neighbor's shed sharing the fence," he said, "and a crawl space that opens under the back steps. Looks recent." I thought about the scratch marks on the glass, how small they'd seemed. Smaller than a dog, smaller than a grown person's hand. You can make a lot of marks with patience and time. He was halfway to the hallway when the front door rattled. He turned. Everyone turned. The doorbell didn't ring. There was a knock. Not soft, not pounding. The kind you use when you live there. The detective went to the door. He didn't look at me, which told me he was thinking through the version where I wasn't who I said I was. He opened it on the chain. A woman stood on the porch with a bag on her shoulder. Her hair was pulled back hard. Her sweater was wrong for the night. "Mara," I said without meaning to. She looked at me like I had been in her kitchen without permission. Then she looked past the detective at the uniforms, the light, the tape glowing in the yard. She did something with her face so fast I almost missed it. A reset, like a person choosing which version they are. "What's going on?" she asked the detective, polite, puzzled. She had a train ticket in her hand. The print was smudged from the rain. "Ma'am, can we talk inside?" the detective said. He undid the chain. Two uniforms stepped close without looking like they had. Luther stood. His whole posture changed. He wasn't leaning anymore. He was a straight line. She came in. 1 step. 2. The smell on her was hotel soap and something metal faint from old keys. She saw me and gave me the little smile people give when they think they should know you and don't. "You're the sitter," she said. "Did something happen with Luther?" "He found something," I said. My voice did that jump it does when you put it on a shelf that doesn't fit. "In the yard." She didn't look at the yard. She looked at Luther. He stared back like a person at a window. The skin between his eyes wrinkled. That's how dogs frown. He didn't wag. "We need to ask you a few questions," the detective said. "Can you tell us where you've been tonight and where you were yesterday?" She answered like a person who had been taught by TV to answer. Train into the city, a friend's couch, her phone died. She came back because she forgot medication. Calm, neat, too neat. You can always see the seam on neat when the room it's in is a mess. "Can I get the medication?" she asked. "It's upstairs." "We'll get it for you," the woman officer said. "What's the bottle look like?" "Orange," Mara said. She made a small, helpless gesture with her hand that would read as sweet to someone who didn't have a dog staring at it like it had bones inside. "White cap, my name on it." The detective nodded to another officer. He went upstairs. "And the basement," Mara added, too casual. "The latch sticks. Sometimes the washer cuts out and you have to jiggle it." "No one goes downstairs," the detective said, not unkind, but with the sort of finality that ends a path before it starts. "Oh." She looked at the kitchen, the dark window, the open notebook on the counter with my little list of feeding times. "Is Luther okay?" she asked again, but now there was a tightness around the word Luther, like it didn't fit in her mouth. "He's fine," I said, because he was, and because he was also the only thing in the room that wasn't pretending. A voice from the yard called for the detective. He excused himself and went. The room shrank without him. The young officer shifted weight from foot to foot. The woman officer kept her eyes on Mara's hands, not her face. Luther stood between me and Mara, not close enough to be a claim, not far enough to be polite. "Can I put my bag down?" Mara asked. She was already unshouldering it. She placed it on the little table by the door, next to the bowl of keys, the same way she must always place it, like the bag had its own mark in the wood. She kept her fingers on the strap. She didn't unzip it. She didn't need to. I could hear the small things inside it shift when she moved her thumb. I heard something clink soft, like a bolt. I remembered the missing gate bolt. It was a dumb connection to make. It also sat down in my head and didn't get back up. The officer who'd gone upstairs came down with an orange bottle. He handed it to the woman officer, who read the label. "Mara," she read out loud, and then the last name. Seeing the name written was like watching a person stand up in a dark theater when you thought you were alone. "That's me," Mara said, smiling the right amount. "Mind if I look in the bag?" the woman officer asked, like she was asking if she could take a plate. It wasn't a question. Mara's mouth opened to say yes or no. Before a word came, Luther moved. It wasn't a lunge. He walked to the bag and put his nose on it, and then looked at the woman officer, and then at me. He did it again, the way he had looked from the yard to me when he wanted to show me the hand without dropping it. He sat. He lifted his right paw, slow, and set it on the table beside the bag. He left it there. I said, "He's pointing." The woman officer nodded once like that's what she'd been waiting for. She took the bag and unzipped it. Inside, a bolt dark with grease, a length of braided cord, a utility knife with a new blade, a phone with a cracked screen, and a pair of latex gloves that had been worn and turned inside out and shoved back into their own mouth. There was a smell that had nothing to do with the yard, and everything to do with bleach trying to be a clean story. Mara didn't gasp. She didn't run. She did a simple thing. She grabbed for the bag. The woman officer was faster. The young officer stepped in and put his hand out, palm to shoulder, and said, "Ma'am," in a voice that wasn't his, and would be soon if he kept saying it. The detective came back in as if he'd been waiting for this beat. He saw the bag, the bolt, the dog with his paw on the table like a person saying grace. He said, "Mara, you're going to come with us," like it was a schedule item, and reached for cuffs. She did run then. Not to the front door, to the kitchen. She moved with that exact knowledge people have of their own houses. The unthinking way you cut corners you've cut 1,000 times. The woman officer went after her. The young officer went wide to block the hallway to the basement. I went nowhere. Luther went everywhere. He passed me like a piece of weather and took the kitchen in 3 strides. I heard the sliding door hit the broom handle and stop. I heard the clack of the basement latch. I heard my own name in my mouth. Too late and for no reason. They took her on the stairs. There was no fight worth a TV scene. There was a shuffle, a foot slip, the dulled ring of the cuffs. The detective took her by the elbow and brought her back up and through the front room. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at Luther. She stared at the far wall with a face that had shut all its windows. They took her out to a car. The porch light from the neighbor's house caught her hair and made it look like in the picture. The bag sat on the table like a mouth left open. Then the house filled with a softer movement. The techs came in with boxes and lights and sticks to test for things I was glad I didn't know how to name. They measured and took pictures and bagged. In the yard, they lifted more soil, and the stretcher was not empty on its second pass. No one narrated. That's the real difference between TV and a room like this. No one explains anything. They just do the thing in front of them. At some point close to dawn, a new detective with a tie loose at his throat sat with me at the kitchen table. Luther lay under my knees with his head on my foot, heavy like a warm brick. The detective asked questions that were narrower now. Had I noticed any signs of forced entry before tonight? Had the owner said anything odd? Did I know a man by the name in the wallet? Did Mara mention anyone else who had access? He wrote my answers in small, tidy print that seemed too neat for the words. I asked one, "Who is he?" Meaning the man in the wallet, and the body in the yard, and anyone else the bags belonged to. "We're working on it," he said. He nodded toward the basement. "There's a cut into the foundation under the washer. New. Looks like someone's been working a tunnel under the porch. There's a hatch at the base of the fence. Your dog didn't dig that. He found it." "She used the compost to cover the smell," I said. "It came out flat." "Looks that way," he said. "Why the scratches on the glass?" "Could be an animal," he said. He didn't believe it. He didn't not believe it. That's a cop's voice when it's dark out. No promises either way. They told me I could go when the sun was up enough to make the yard look like a yard again. I signed things. I left with my backpack. I stood on the sidewalk and looked back at the tall, narrow house and thought stupidly that the curtains looked tired. Luther stood beside me, off leash, because someone had unclipped him to put a boot where his leash had been. He leaned into my leg the way he had the first hour I met him. He was heavier now. He smelled like wet wool and something else I wasn't going to wash out of my head. An officer asked me if there was someone who could pick me up. I said my sister could. I called her. She cried a little at the first hello, and then stopped because she's practical. She said she'd be there in 20 minutes. I sat on the curb. Luther sat too, and put his head on my knee. 2 neighbors came out in robes and then a third in running clothes. No one met my eye long. A truck slowed at the stop sign and the driver watched Luther and me the way you watch people you hope not to be. They kept Luther. That part surprised me and then didn't. He was evidence, technically. He had smell on him and maybe the kind of hair police tweezers look for. The animal control woman who came for him was kind in the way people are when they know they're taking something you want to keep. She squatted and let him sniff her hand and spoke to him like he was an equal. She asked if he was up to date on shots. I said I thought so. She said, "We'll take care of him." She meant it. They put him in a crate in the back of a van. He didn't fight. He turned once to look at me through the mesh. His eyes were less pale in daylight. I lifted my hand. It was dumb, the kind of gesture you make at airport glass. He blinked, slow, and then lay down. My sister came. I got in her car. She had water and a granola bar like I was a kid after a dentist appointment. We drove. I didn't look back again. In the passenger seat, I held my phone and stared at the black screen, because the idea of seeing another message bubble with someone else's idea of the night in it made me feel like I could float up out of the seat and never come down. At her place, she put me on the couch, made toast, handed me a blanket. I fell asleep without meaning to. When I woke up, the afternoon was wrapped around the blinds. News was a quiet hum in the other room. She muted it when I stirred. But I'd heard enough to know the house was a headline now that would grow smaller every hour, until it wasn't one at all. The department called me that evening for more clarification. Then the next day. Then less. The story gelled as stories do. A woman alone, a trail of debts, an ex no one could find, a friend who came by sometimes, a backyard that moved when it rained. The tunnel under the porch wasn't deep, just enough to make a pocket. Inside it, bags, too many. A list of missing people online that didn't match the number. A folded ping pong table that had a corner chip someone had tried to sand smooth. A padlock that had been bought in a hardware store 3 blocks away with cash. On the receipt, a pack of utility blades. I kept waiting for someone to tell me the part that would line it up. Motive, lover, accident gone wrong, Breaking Bad. No one did. The detective with the tie called me once more and said, "We'll be in touch if we need anything else," and made it sound like they wouldn't. I stopped sitting with the app. I took it off my phone, and it felt like pulling a splinter that turned out to be a nail. I started waking up at night when the building heater kicked on, because the metal in the ducts made a sound like the sliding door lock trying to make up its mind. I taped my own closet latch so it wouldn't rattle. Once or twice I stood at my window and looked down at the alley behind our place, and made myself understand that all alleys are different, and most of them are only alleys. A month later, the animal control woman called me. "We found a placement for him," she said, meaning Luther, a retired handler. "He's a good dog. He'll have work." "He already did," I said. My voice surprised me. It sounded like I was talking through cloth. "You can visit if you want," she said. "Some people like that. Some don't." "I don't know," I said. "Tell him." "No, don't tell him anything." "Okay," she said. "Take care." I hung up and stood in my kitchen, my own kitchen, with its cheap laminate counter and my dented kettle and my trash can, with a bag that never quite fits. The room looked like itself. The window looked out on a fire escape. The glass had no scratches. I put my hand on it anyway, palm flat, and felt how cold travels through a pane. I still think about the moment he dropped the hand at my feet. Not because of what it was, because of the way he did it. Careful, like he was handing me a problem I could finally see. Sometimes late, when the street is empty and someone's TV light flashes across my ceiling, I hear a knock that's not on my door at all, but somewhere under the idea of a door. The kind of knock that says, "I'm here." It comes from my own head, of course. It doesn't matter. I get up. I check the locks. I check the window. I put my hand on the wall by the spot where my building's old paint has a seam. I say the dog's name without sound. The last time the detective called, he told me something I hadn't asked. "We pulled phone records," he said. "She texted the regular sitter 3 weeks before you." He didn't answer. "He's on the list now." I said I was sorry, like it was useful. He said, "You did fine," in a way people say when they're trying to move you back to a day where you'll sleep through the night. He paused and added, "The way you described the knocks. We've heard that before. From neighbors. They thought it was plumbing." "Maybe it was," I said. "Maybe," he said. He didn't believe it. He didn't not believe it. When I pass a narrow house now, any town, any street, if the curtains are pulled and the yard is patchy and the fence is wrong by an inch, I think of a padlock hanging open like an earring and a chain light that takes a second to catch. It's not the gore that sticks. It's the small decisions, the ones a person makes in a kitchen with their hand on a handle and their dog waiting to see which way the door will move. There's no neat end here. No lesson. I didn't become a better person. I didn't become a worse one. Sometimes I keep the porch light on when I go to bed, which is wasteful. And sometimes I don't. Sometimes I hear nothing, and am grateful in a way that feels like a superstition. Sometimes I see a dog lean his heavy head against someone's hip, and feel the air in my chest go different. When that happens, I step around them, give them space. I let the leash go slack. I keep walking.